What if one of the most advanced civilizations in human history disappeared? Without a clear explanation, no massive war, no dramatic collapse recorded in history, no clear reason, only silence. The Indus Valley Civilization existed thousands of years ago, long before many of the societies we study today. It stretched across what is now modern-day India and Pakistan, and at its peak, it was home to millions of people living in cities that were shockingly advanced. Cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, places that reveal something unexpected, something that doesn't fit with what we imagine about ancient history. Because these were not primitive settlements. They were organized, planned, engineered, with streets laid out in perfect grids, homes built with uniform bricks, and one of the most advanced drainage systems of the ancient world. Water flowed through underground channels, waste was managed carefully, cleanliness was clearly important. All of this thousands of years ago, at a time when many other civilizations were still developing basic structures. But what makes this even more mysterious is what we don't find. There are no massive palaces, no clear signs of rulers or kings, no grand monuments celebrating power. It was a civilization without obvious hierarchy, without visible control, almost as if it functioned differently, more balanced, more equal, or perhaps more organized than we understand. And then there is their writing, a script that still remains undeciphered. Symbols carved into seals, short inscriptions, repeated patterns, but no translation, no clear meaning. It is a language we still cannot read, which means their thoughts, their knowledge, their history remain locked, hidden, silent. And that silence creates a gap, because without understanding their writing, we only see the surface, the structures, the remains, but not the story. And yet, even from that surface, we can tell something unusual existed here, because this civilization did not grow randomly. It expanded in a structured way across a vast area, maintaining consistency, maintaining design, maintaining a system. And that level of coordination raises questions because it suggests planning, communication, and a shared understanding across great distances. But then, something changed. Slowly, or perhaps suddenly, the cities began to empty, structures were left behind, systems stopped functioning, and people disappeared. Not completely, but enough to mark the end of something significant. And the most unsettling part is that we don't know exactly why. Some believe it was climate change, shifting rivers, environmental pressure. Others suggest economic decline, resource shortages, or gradual migration. But none of these explanations fully explain everything. Because the decline does not appear chaotic, it does not show signs of panic, it feels controlled, gradual, almost intentional, as if the civilization did not collapse, but faded. And that idea raises a deeper question. What if they didn't just disappear? What if they left, not as a failure, but as a decision? And if that were true, then where did they go, and why?
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. And if they left, then they left behind a message. Not in words we can read, but in what remains. Because everything about their cities still speaks, even without language. The precision, the organization, the consistency. It all suggests something important. This was not a civilization struggling to survive. This was a civilization that had already solved many problems. Water, sanitation, urban planning, trade, all functioning, all connected, all stable. And yet, it still ended, which raises a deeper question. If a civilization reaches stability, what causes it to disappear? Because collapse usually comes from chaos, war, conflict, disaster. But here, we do not see clear signs of that. No widespread destruction, no burned cities, no sudden break. Only a slow absence, a quiet disappearance. And that kind of ending feels different. It feels controlled. Almost as if something changed, not outside, but inside. Because sometimes civilizations do not fall. They transform, they shift, they evolve into something else. And what we call disappearance may only be a transition into a form we no longer recognize. And maybe that is what happened here. Because the people of the Indus Valley Civilization did not vanish completely. Their genetic traces, their cultural echoes still exist, scattered across regions, blended into later societies. But the structure, the system they built, that is what disappeared. And that distinction matters because it suggests they didn't die out. They moved on. But why would a civilization leave behind cities that were already functioning so well? Unless something made them, or forced them to, or guided them to. And that possibility opens another layer of mystery. Because sometimes change does not come from within. Sometimes it comes from outside, from forces we don't fully see. Environmental shifts, yes, that is one explanation. The drying of rivers like the Indus River system, changes in climate, gradual loss of water sources. These are real possibilities. But even then, the response of the civilization still feels organized, still feels measured, still feels intentional. Not chaotic, not desperate, but planned. As if they understood something coming, something changing. And they adapted before it fully arrived. Because a civilization that can build with such precision can also observe patterns, predict changes, prepare. And maybe that is exactly what they did. But if they prepared, if they knew, then the question becomes even more interesting. What did they know that we don't? And where is that knowledge now? Because if their writing remains undeciphered, if their system remains only partially understood, then it is possible that something important is still hidden, not lost, just unread, waiting for someone to finally understand it. And maybe, when that happens, the story of the Indus civilization will not be about disappearance at all, but of transformation, a shift from one form into another, one that continued, but in a way we have not yet fully recognized. And if something is still hidden, if something remains unread, then it may not just be history. It may be information. Because civilizations do not only build structures, they store knowledge, they pass ideas, they leave behind systems. And sometimes those systems are not obvious, because not all knowledge is written. Some of it is built, encoded into design, hidden in patterns, placed into the way things are arranged. And when we look again at the cities of the Indus Valley Civilization, we begin to notice something unusual. The repetition, the precision, the consistency across distance. It almost feels like a system, not just a city, not just multiple cities, but a network, connected, planned as a whole. And that idea changes everything, because a network has purpose, it functions together, it communicates, it maintains balance. And if this civilization operated as a network, then each city was not independent, but part of something larger, something coordinated, something designed. And maybe that design was not only practical, but intentional. Because some researchers have noticed that certain layouts, certain alignments, certain placements do not seem random. They follow patterns, patterns that could have meaning, patterns that could represent something more than simple planning. And if that is true, then the cities themselves may hold information, not written in words, but in structure, in geometry, in spatial design. And if knowledge was stored like that, then it would not disappear easily. It would remain, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to recognize the pattern. Because once you see a pattern, everything changes. What once looked random begins to feel intentional. What once seemed simple becomes complex, and what once seemed lost becomes hidden. And that brings us to a deeper possibility. What if the Indus civilization was not just advanced, but aware? Aware of patterns, of cycles, of changes over time. Because civilizations that understand cycles can predict, can prepare, can move before something happens. And if they saw something coming, a shift, a change in environment, a disruption in their system, then leaving would not be failure. It would be strategy. It would be survival. And if they left strategically, then they did not leave blindly. They carried something with them, knowledge, understanding, experience. And that knowledge did not disappear. It moved, it spread, it transformed into something else, something we may still see today without realizing its origin. Because over time, knowledge changes form. It becomes culture, tradition, belief, fragments of something older, something deeper. And maybe that is what we are seeing now. Not the civilization itself, but what remains of it, hidden inside later history, blended into other societies, carried forward without its original name, without its original structure, but still present. And if that is true, then the Indus civilization did not vanish. It became something else, something that continued in ways we have not fully traced. And that means its story is not finished.
And if the Indus civilization did not simply disappear, if it transformed, if it carried knowledge forward, then the final question becomes, what was its true purpose? Because everything we've seen so far points to something unusual. Not just survival, not just expansion, but optimization, efficiency, balance, a system that worked almost too well. And when something works that well, it is usually designed, not randomly formed, but carefully built, step by step, with intention. And that intention raises one final possibility. What if the Indus civilization was not just a society, but part of a larger system, something beyond a single region, something beyond a single time?
Because when we compare it to other ancient civilizations, we begin to notice something strange. Similar patterns, similar alignments, similar ideas appearing in completely different parts of the world, without clear connection, as if knowledge was shared or rediscovered again and again across time. And maybe the Indus civilization was one part of something much larger, a network of knowledge, a system that appeared in different forms, in different places, at different times, always advancing, always building, always leaving something behind. And if that is true, then what we call ancient history may not be separate events, but connected pieces of a much bigger picture, one that we only see in fragments, because over time connections are lost, names change, cultures shift, and what was once unified becomes divided, hidden behind time. But the patterns remain, subtle, repeating, waiting to be noticed. And maybe that is what we are beginning to see now. Not just the remains of one civilization, but the outline of something greater, something that existed long before we understood it, something that may have guided development, shared knowledge, or simply observed and allowed things to unfold. And if the Indus civilization was part of that system, then its disappearance was not an end, but a transition, a shift into the next phase. And maybe that phase is still continuing, even now.
And if this is true, if what we are seeing are only fragments, then the real story has never been fully told, because fragments do not explain themselves. They wait to be connected. And once they begin to connect, something changes. History no longer feels linear. It no longer feels like a simple progression from primitive to advanced, from past to present. Instead, it begins to feel layered, as if knowledge appears, disappears, and then reappears again, in different forms, at different times. And maybe the Indus civilization was one of those moments, a peak, a point where understanding reached a certain level before shifting again. Because if knowledge is not preserved clearly, it does not vanish completely. It transforms, it adapts, it hides inside new systems, new cultures, new ideas. And over time, the origin becomes unclear, the source becomes distant, until eventually it is forgotten and rediscovered again. And maybe that cycle has happened more than once, more than we realize. Because when we look closely at different civilizations, different eras, different parts of the world, we sometimes see hints of the same ideas, the same patterns, the same questions, appearing again, as if something is repeating or being remembered. And if that is true, then the Indus civilization was not just advanced for its time. It may have been part of a cycle, a moment in a repeating pattern, where knowledge rises, organizes, spreads, and then changes form, leaving behind only traces, only structures, only silence. And that silence is what we are left with today. Cities without voices, symbols without translation, systems without explanation, and questions that continue, not because we lack intelligence, but because we are still missing pieces, pieces that may not be lost, only hidden, waiting for the moment when they finally connect.
And as all these ideas begin to settle, the question changes once again.
It is no longer just about the past. It becomes about perception. Because what we call lost is often just not understood, and what we call mystery is often just incomplete information. The Indus Valley Civilization still exists, not in the way it once did, not as cities, not as a visible system, but as something else, something quieter, something more subtle. It exists in fragments, in traces, in patterns that remain even when the full picture is gone. And maybe that is how knowledge survives, not as something obvious, but as something hidden within, waiting to be recognized again. Because recognition is different from discovery. Discovery finds something new. Recognition remembers something old. And maybe what we are looking at now is not something new at all, but something familiar, something that has always been there, just seen differently. Because once perspective changes, everything begins to shift. The cities are no longer just ruins, they become signals. The structures are no longer just buildings, they become patterns. The disappearance is no longer just an ending, it becomes movement. And the silence is no longer empty, it becomes space. Space for interpretation, space for understanding, space for the possibility that something more has always existed, just beyond what we expected to see. And maybe that is the most important part of all. Not what the Indus civilization was, not why it disappeared, but what it represents. A reminder that even the most advanced systems can become invisible over time, not because they are gone, but because they are no longer recognized. And if that is true, then the real question is no longer about them, it is about us. What are we not seeing right now because it feels familiar, because it feels normal, because it has always been there? And maybe, just like the past, the answers are not hidden far away. They are hidden in plain sight, waiting.
And now, there is nothing left to add. No new detail, no new explanation. Only what remains. The silence of the cities, the stillness of the ruins, the patterns that continue to exist, even without meaning. Because meaning is something we create, but structure remains long after meaning fades. And the Indus civilization is still structure, still present, still visible, even if its purpose is no longer clear. And maybe that is where the truth exists, not in what we can prove, but in what we can observe. Because observation does not require certainty, it only requires attention. And when attention changes, so does understanding. The same city, the same ruins, the same patterns begin to feel different, not empty, but incomplete, not lost, but unfinished. And maybe that is the most important idea, that what we are looking at is not something that ended, but something that paused, something that shifted, something that moved forward beyond the form we recognize. Because history does not always leave clear endings. Sometimes it leaves open spaces, gaps, silence. And within that silence, there is possibility. Possibility that something continued. Possibility that something remains. Possibility that something is still connected, even now. And if that is true, then the Indus civilization is not just part of the past, it is part of a larger story, one that is still unfolding, one that we are still trying to understand,
one that may never be fully complete.
And in the end, there is only one thing left, not an answer, not a conclusion, but a feeling, a quiet awareness that something once existed, something complete, something understood, something that made sense in a way we no longer fully see. The Indus Valley Civilization does not explain itself. It does not tell its story clearly. It does not reveal its purpose directly. It simply remains, in fragments, in structure, in silence. And that silence is not empty. It is full, full of possibilities, full of interpretations, full of questions that continue. Because when something disappears without a clear reason, it does not feel finished. It feels paused, as if the story did not end, but moved somewhere else, somewhere we have not fully followed. And maybe that is why it continues to feel so present, even now. Because something unresolved does not stay in the past. It stays with us, quietly, in the background, waiting for the moment when it is finally seen differently, not as something lost, but as something still connected, still part of a larger picture, still part of a story that has not yet been fully understood.
And as everything settles, the need for answers begins to fade. Not because the questions are gone, but because they have changed. They are no longer searching for certainty, only understanding. A different kind of clarity, one that does not come from proof, but from perspective. Because sometimes the most important part of a mystery is not solving it, but seeing it differently. The Indus Valley Civilization is no longer just a lost civilization. It becomes something else, a reflection, a possibility, a reminder that complexity can exist without explanation, that systems can function without leaving obvious traces, and that understanding does not always arrive immediately. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes a shift in thinking, and sometimes it takes the willingness to accept that not everything is fully visible. Because what remains hidden is not always gone. It is simply waiting, waiting to be seen in a different way. And maybe that is where we are now, at a point where the past is no longer just behind us, but around us, embedded in patterns, in ideas, in systems we do not yet fully understand. And if that is true, then the story of the Indus civilization is not something that ended. It is something that continues, quietly, subtly, unnoticed, until the moment comes when it is finally recognized again.